So, as Father Bruce has said, I'm going to say just a very little bit about praying with icons, and the most important thing is that you're going to have a chance to do some praying with these beautiful icons that we've got here. And then I'll say a little bit after that specifically about each of them, but I want you to have a chance to encounter them first. But first of all, I'd just like to take a moment to consider the great gift of sight and all that comes to us through our eyes. So, just take a moment, look around, and let your eyes fix on anything, an object, might be a colour that somebody's wearing. Don't worry if anyone stares at you, it's all part of the exercise. Or something you're wearing, or something you've got with you. And just take a moment, just really to look at that. So, find something to look at. And just look as though you've never seen that object before. It might be something very, very familiar. It might be something you've never really noticed before, but just look as though you're seeing it for the first time. And notice things like colours, patterns. Imagine what it would feel like if you're not touching it, if you're not holding it. What would it feel like to touch? What do you think the texture is? And then close your eyes and see if you can sort of imagine, see if you can still see it in your imagination. Open your eyes again and look at it. And just think to yourself for a moment, how would you describe that object to somebody who'd never seen it? Perhaps to a blind person. What are the words you use to convey what it really looks like? I remember when I was at school, we had to write, for an English lesson, we had to write an essay on how we would describe a spoon to somebody from Mars who'd never seen one. It's not as easy as you think. So just imagine how different it would be, how difficult life might be if we didn't have all the information, the beauty, the understanding, the new things that come to us through our eyes. A gift of sight. And it's a gift from God, and it's a gift that we can use in prayer, in worshipping God. I don't know if you're like me and were taught at school that you have to keep your hands together and your eyes closed to pray. Well, you don't. Not always. Sometimes pray with our eyes open to look at something. A real way to open ourselves up to God, to what God wants to say to us. And so, as I said, I'm going to talk about one way of praying with our eyes and our hearts, but using our eyes as a way into our hearts, perhaps we could say, and that's through the use of icons. Just be nice to hear from you. What do you, anything that you know or think or feel about icons? Anything you've experienced? Have you seen many icons before?
They all seem to be very peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
Very serene.
What makes them peaceful? What do you think it is?
Probably the expression, so it's the style of the expression of the painting.
I associate them with more of the Orthodox tradition,
Yes.
not so much Anglican,
Yes.
Protestant.
Yes. Yes, that's
They're a
true.
they're a bit strange to us, I think, aren't they?
Yes, thank you for that, because I think that needs saying, and sometimes people don't like to say that, but they do look strange. And I think if we're used to other kinds of art, they can look very strange sometimes. Yeah, mysterious, bit different from a different tradition. And yes, they do. They come to us from the Orthodox churches of the East. Although more and more becoming popular, I think, in Western churches, Catholic and Anglican churches, and you know, you go in the cathedrals now, often there'll be an icon, and perhaps a place to light candles. It's something that crosses barriers and is strange at the same time. I think both, you know, have to hold both of those. They're both true.
Sometimes feel finding a little problem with it, just because you know it does feel a bit sort of sometimes a little idolatrous. But I mean, it's something you have to get used to. I guess it's in a sense it depends what it is from. And sometimes they're a little sinister, I find.
Yeah. Yes. I remember someone once saying, when I asked that question, someone once said what they'd noticed was that nobody ever smiles in icons, which is...
I find them relate to them more as representations of inner states rather than illustrations.
Yes, that's very true, and they're not illustrations in the way that we'd understand it.
They seem to have a power to draw you into the pictures.
Yes, to draw you in. That's a good point.
They're very still. It's part of the stillness that they have.
Although there's a bit of movement, I think, in the one with the child in the centre, but we can kind of have a look later. Sorry, you've been trying to say something.
I find it's a bit difficult to worship with, because when Christianity came to Africa, I'm talking about Nigeria.
Yes.
The traditional religion used to be worshipping through idols.
Ah, yes.
And then we were moved away from that. And we were meant to understand that it's not relevant. That it's the cross and Christ.
Yes.
So it's a bit on.
Sure, yes, thank you for that. That's a very important point. And in a sense, they're not essential. And what is important, as you say, is the cross, is Christ. And they're a way in for some people, yes.
I find them very intense. It's like a distillation, quite rich, and therefore, in a sense, quite difficult to interpret or...
Yes, they can feel, they can be difficult to interpret, because there is, if you like, a language of painting icons. There, for the traditional ones, I have to be careful what I say, because someone will always turn around and say, oh, well, I saw an icon that didn't do whatever. But traditionally painted or written, you talk about writing icons, follow very strict rules, very ancient rules. Which to us can almost look like a language, trying to read a language that we don't quite understand. So yes, we do need to learn something. And I think, again, there's lots of paradoxes, aren't there? They can be intense, they can draw us in, they can speak to us on one level, and on the other they can feel very mysterious and strange. So I want to say just a little bit about how icons came to be, just to set them in context, which is really to pick up some of the things that you've said. If you think back to the history of the church, in the early days of the church, in the first centuries, the times of great martyrdom, where Christians had to worship in secret. Of course, you wouldn't have Christian symbols in your house, on your door, in the streets, because that would give you away. So, you know, I'm sure you all know about the fish, the secret sign. Everything had to be very secret and low-key. in a world where a lot of attention was paid to beauty, the Greeks and the Romans valued beauty very greatly and valued art. So it was all around, but it was something that couldn't be explicitly Christian until, you all know the story of Constantine, Emperor Constantine, who was converted very dramatically to Christianity. And in the year 313, he issued an edict making it possible, making it legal to be a Christian and to be a Christian publicly. And that's one of those great dates and great turning points in Christian history. I mean, there isn't time to go into all the changes that that meant. Only to say that one of the things it meant was that suddenly there could be a great explosion of art, of Christian art, because it was all right. You know, you could build churches, you didn't have to worship in secret in somebody's back room. And when they started building spaces for worship, they wanted to make them beautiful. So you start to get people painting, or mosaics, scenes from the Gospel, the face of Christ, and so on. And in the eastern part of the church, because the church had spread quite far, so in the sort of Greek-speaking eastern areas of the church, there's a lot of influence. Two things, really. One was, which sounds a bit macabre, but if you've ever seen an Egyptian mummy, and the mummy case, not the actual thing in bandages, often there was a portrait on the front, painted of the person, of the face looking out, and eyes that would engage you, and that was to sort of encapsulate the person, the sense of that person who died. So it wasn't just a decoration, it was actually had quite a sort of spiritual purpose. And that influenced some of the early Christian paintings, and in the faces of some, not particularly so much in any of those, except possibly the one of Christ there, I don't know. But in some way you get almost like a close-up face of Christ or one of the saints, and you can see that's where it came from. And the other thing was that as the empire spread, the emperor and the highest officials couldn't get everywhere, obviously they couldn't be everywhere at once. And there came the custom of having the portrait of the emperor, which would be treated very solemnly, given a place of honour, and you sort of regarded that as that was really him present at an important meeting or whatever. So the painting came to, in some way, be a channel for the presence of somebody. So if you can see how that idea as well, which was floating around, Christians began to say, well, you know, let's paint an icon of Christ, just to help us focus. If you think this wasn't a time when people would have Bibles at home, they couldn't, they couldn't go away and read the Gospels privately, it was what people heard in church and what they saw. Those are the ways that they learned. And then, of course, leaping ahead in history, the other thing you might have heard of, you've heard of the word iconoclast, as somebody who wants to smash images. There was great controversy in the church, and this is another point about icons, it's very important, from Christians who said it's not right to have paintings and to treat them with a lot of awe and reverence and respect, because exactly like as though you were saying, there's a danger of idolatry. They can get in the way. If we believe Christ is present, where two or three are gathered, why do you need a picture? It can be, instead of a window through it, can be a barrier. And also, there were people around, there had been sort of sects around for centuries before Christianity, of people who believed that matter and material things weren't, well, at best weren't important. They were just, annoyances to kind of try and ignore. And some even said, well, it's actually evil. God couldn't possibly have created people. I mean, just, think of all the business of, eating and digesting and going to the laboratory and childbirth and all those messy things. How could God have anything to do with that. That must be just, something we want to get away from as quickly as possible. So there was a bit of that around, and they said, how can you get a piece of wood, paint that's come out of the earth, it's from the rocks or whatever, and paint a picture of Christ? That's disrespectful. It's, all this awful dirty stuff. That mustn't get in the way of our worship. And the controversy raged on through the 8th and into the 9th century. The people who wanted icons were not arguing, this is the important thing, I think, as we talk about praying with icons. They didn't just want to make their churches and their homes look beautiful with decoration. They wanted to say something about who Jesus is and what God did for us, and that's, I think, really important to kind of focus on in this Holy Week. When we're thinking about God who came into the world in a human body so that he could suffer and die, which is what humans do, in order to save us, in order to redeem us. And these were people in the church who were saying, if Jesus hadn't been fully human, he couldn't save us because he wouldn't have anything in common with us. He all very well, but, he had the same body as we do, made out of the same stuff. We know that now, we know that scientifically, that we're all linked, all the molecules that make up our bodies, which come out from space, from the stars originally. That body that Jesus had is, in a sense, very much made of the same stuff as ours. They knew it then, instinctively. So they said, yes, he had to be human to save us. He had a human face to show us the love of God. You can think about love, but unless you know that someone loves you, and they're there, and they're looking at you with love, it's really hard to understand what love means. It's the way we learn it, is by being loved. So God had a human face, so of course we can paint it. We can make pictures of it. And that was the argument in the end that won. So it was an argument not about art, but about our faith, and the humanity and the divinity of Jesus. And that's why icons are held in such a high place in the Orthodox Church particularly, because they remind us that God came into our world and that we can be in contact with God through our senses. And that when an icon is painted, yes, we use symbolically all of creation. There's the plant kingdom, they're painted on wood. There's the mineral kingdom, the pigments, the dyes, the colours, the earth. The animal kingdom, they're painted traditionally with egg tempera, so that eggs are used, and sometimes animal glue to prepare the boards that they're painted on. So it's the whole of creation, and we can offer it back. Not as something to worship in its own right, but to say, yes, God comes to us through creation and created things. And we, because we're made in God's image, we can co-create with God. We can create something beautiful that draws us closer to God. So in that sense, icons are there as a statement of theology and of spirituality. So they enshrine our faith, they remind us of our faith, and they are an opening, a way for us to pray. So, I'm going to invite you just to take some time, about 5 or 10 minutes or so. I'm going to move out of the way, so don't worry. Just to come and have a look at all three. And then find yourself, I don't think it'll be too crowded, perhaps the people at the front can stay where they are. Just without really thinking about it, just choose which of the three sort of catches your attention, catches your eye or your heart or whatever. So I'll give you a few minutes for that, and then I'll just lead us through a little guided exercise for you to look at just that one icon you've chosen. And then after that, I'll say just a little bit about each of the three of them. So it's not about knowing. You encounter the mystery. You don't have to know what it all means. Just have a meeting with one of the icons. So take a few minutes now to choose one, or let it choose you. Anyone who prayed with this icon? Anything you want to just share about that? Do, but anything that struck you?
Something I want to hold with me with my own interior prayer. It's a bit beyond the rational thought. It's just,
Yes.
it's just something I want to
Something you want to hold
take
on
with
to?
me. As
Give me a tremendous sense of strength and protection.
So this is Jesus, of course. And we can tell that, I was talking about the language of icons. There's often writing on icons. That's sort of the monogram, the name, Jesus Christ. And around his halo, you can probably see the cross, and if you came and had a look, you could see the cross. There's also some Greek letters there. Ho, he who is the living one. And in the Greek Old Testament, which was the version of the Old Testament that first Christians had, that was how it was translated, the name which God gave to Moses at the burning bush, I am the living one. So this is very much, the reason I'm starting with this icon is it's very much an image of Jesus as prophesied in the Old Testament. That name. And you see there these fiery figures with fiery wings and the wheels. Probably know throughout the Old Testament, I actually looked it up before I came here several times, many times, referred to God seated on the cherubim, enthroned on the cherubim, and there he is. And of course the difference is in the Old Testament also we hear again and again, no one has seen the face of God. But we've seen it in Jesus. One of the rules of icon painting, icon writing, is that you can only depict what human eyes have seen. Now this is stretching it a little bit, but it's saying the God of our fathers, the God of the Old Testament, the great God who is, the one God, became incarnate in Christ. And so we can paint him. We can paint his face, and we can show him on the cherubim to show that it is the one God. And one example from Scripture, it's from Psalm 80, about the longing, the people's longing for God, again throughout the Old Testament, longing to be saved. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock. You are enthroned upon the cherubim, shine forth before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh. Stir up your might and come and save us. Restore us, O God. Let your face shine, that we may be saved. So again, in Holy Week, gives a particular meaning, doesn't it, to that longing for for salvation. This is how it happened, and we're about to live through all those events again in all the liturgy of Holy Week. This is the God who saves. The God that all through the ages we've longed for comes to save us. Perhaps not as they imagined. We don't see him enthroned on the cherubim, we see him on the cross. So now, if you like the next instalment, this is how it happened. So anybody pray this one? Any words or feelings you want to share about that?
It was about the vulnerability of the baby. It was it's complete abandon. It's complete
Yes.
being completely trusting in. There's nothing baby can do. It's helplessness, and Mary's instinct to protect and love. But there's a really thoughtful. There are so many questions to me in her face.
Yes. Yes. Else?
I saw the baby as in some way hanging on
Mm.
to her robe. And also there's something about her expression, so sort of wistful and tender.
As if she knows what's going to happen.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. I think that the fact that they're entwined nearly, you know, that she's supporting him, but he's also leading her. And I think that's a very Christian feeling, isn't it? To need, to be needed.
Yes.
With God needs us really.
Yes.
And there's a great sense of that, not letting each other go, but holding on. And it's as if he's looking up to the heavens and God, as if he knows what's coming. She knows what's coming, but they're going to do it with the support of each other.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I think there is very much that sense that both know what is coming. Often, well, always really, I think, when Jesus is shown in an icon, a traditional icon, as a baby, he always looks older than he would have been, as it were, to show again that this is no ordinary child. And so you have that sense, you have that older face, that quite wise face, that knowing face, and you also have the vulnerability of the hands. And yes.
Is there any significance in the colour that's been used? Because when you said, is there something that ours about it, I really don't understand why he or she chose that orange. I was wondering if orange means something, actually.
It's often shown as red. And if you see, there are different colours in the robes that Jesus is shown wearing. Red means, well, there aren't any sort of hard and fast rules about what colour means. I once heard an icon painter say the reason probably why the painter used such and such a colour was that's what he had. So there is a sense of that.
Yeah.
But red is divinity, it's love, it's passion, all those things. Which is why also even in our Western tradition, vestments are red today. So I think the orange is there as a variation of red to provide a focus against Mary's robe. She is often shown in this purpley reddy colour, and one of the reasons for that is that in Exodus, if you remember all those wonderful, elaborate instructions about building the tent of meeting, it goes on and on and on about how many curtain hooks you have to have and all the rest of it. But the important thing was the tent of meeting. God's people in exile, wandering through the desert, had that tent, that place, that holy place to meet with God. And they were told that the covering should be, and it's translated in different translations, but vermilion, purple, red. It's that reddy, purpley colour. And Mary is often shown wearing that to show that, in a sense, she is the tent of meeting. She is where the incarnation happened, where God met humanity in her.
And the position of the child's head is so unusual.
Yes.
And it makes that much more, it's double because it makes it that much more vulnerable, but it makes you think about Christ's power as a result somehow, because if that happened to, I was going to say a normal child, but if the mother found the head in that position, she would have done that immediately. But the child is somehow allowed to fall forward, to show us the child in the incarnation, the face. And his power is all the more dominant. The more you think about it, his power is all the more strong because it's not being pulled back into a human position, if that makes sense.
It does.
I'm present with it, but it doesn't strike me as a comfortable thing to be drawn by. There is a tenderness there, as in the relationship between a mother and a child, but there's also it looks painful.
Yes.
And she looks to be in pain, and the baby's head is, it just doesn't look natural. So it's kind of, I was sort of drawn in and repulsed at the same time.
I think there is pain there and there's struggle there. And something, again about the humanity that God took on, because life is a struggle.
It's like making the red more orange. It's actually pushing the boundary of what you can do in that.
Yes, indeed. And one thing I want to say, just to notice, because it's a theme in all three, yes, all three. Again, these little signs which would have come from the earliest tradition of icons, which don't immediately say anything to us, and that is, you see this, the stripe on his tunic there, that's an orange stripe on his shoulder, and it's there. It's not so easy to see because it's against red, but it's there in that first icon, and it's there in the third one too. That would have been a sign in the Byzantine Empire of the son of the emperor. So it's saying this is the Son of God. Vulnerable child though he is, it's the Son of God. And again the writing is much smaller there, of Christ. And the letters there stand for the Mother of God. So again was one of those great struggles of putting the creeds together in those early centuries to say, yes, Mary is the Mother of God because Jesus is God. So just as we said he had to be human to save us, so he also had to be God. So we can't save ourselves, human beings can't save themselves. So it's saying, yeah, this is the Mother of God. And so therefore that child, that vulnerable, painful child, is God incarnate. So, the scripture I chose for this one is from Galatians. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order to redeem those who are under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. And because you are children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So, you are no longer a slave, but a child. And if a child, then also an heir through God. Who's the third? Did anyone choose that one? Yes, who wants to say?
It seems to be saying, I am the resurrection and the life. That's the first thing
Yes.
that actually came to me.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
There seemed to be a oneness about everything, and God uniting himself with his creation.
There's such a kind of sweetness about Mary, Bethany, and Jesus' feet. So, assuming that's one of the things. That's why it drew me to it. And there's something so kind of wonderful about her posture and her devotion.
And it is indeed, it's I suppose we might today, we might say it's like a preview of next Sunday. It is a resurrection icon. And you see again Jesus identified with that halo, with that stripe on his tunic. The same God enthroned on the cherubim, born as a human baby, who died and rose again. And if you can see, perhaps you noticed when you were up closer, there's gold, and on the original of the icon, probably that was gold paint, just catching the folds, the creases in his robe. And that would catch the light. If you imagine that's an icon with hands in front of it, it would shine, it would sparkle. Something about this risen body of Jesus that is the same and not the same. And that's the promise for us. And his hands are making the same gesture as in that first icon, gesture of blessing. And that's the gesture that an Orthodox priest would use for the blessing in the liturgy. So, a reminder that all blessing comes from God, comes through Christ. And just to point out those wonderful craggy mountains, you often see them, they're not in either of those two, but if you ever see an icon perhaps of the Transfiguration or the Nativity, there will often be these very strange looking rocks, very stylized rocks. The mountain always is the symbol of meeting place between God and humanity. It's like Sinai, where the commandments were given, the mountain of the Transfiguration, the Sermon on the Mount. That's God coming to us. So again it's saying this is God in a human body, died and risen. And the two women greeting him. And the caption, as it were, along the top, greeting of the myrrh-bearing women. Very important place in Orthodox tradition, the women who came with the spices, the women who were the first witnesses of the resurrection. And of course this is from Matthew's Gospel. We'll see how it's almost comes, I said icons weren't illustrations, but it's almost an illustration of that story. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like the lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, but he has been raised, as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you. And this is where the icon comes in. So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." So that's the promise. We have to live through this week, but that's the promise that we know is true. I just want to read two quotes. And one is from a writer called Michel Queneau, who's written quite a lot about icons. Today, when the human countenance is so disfigured, when racial discrimination persists, when so many people suffer from a lack of genuine, sincere communication, faces on the icon, radiating a light that comes from beyond, fascinate and beckon us to contemplate. Although they speak of God, they speak also about humanity. And the second one is from another writer about icons, Lynette Martin, about approaching an icon. First, it is best to look in silence and let the icon say something to you. The first meeting with an icon is similar to a meeting with a cat. Approach with courtesy and let the cat open the conversation. So is there just anything as we end that you're left with that you want to say or ask or just reflect on?
Just detail. On the last icon, all the red words, I don't know if you said...
Along the top?
No, in the middle of the painting. Above the head of the right-hand woman.
Oh, it's their names.
Oh.
Let me have a look. Yes, it says Mary and the other Mary.
Oh.
You will often see that. You will often see the person's name. Christ has got his
Where are you
name.
from? What's the approximate age of these icons?
Well, Father Bruce can tell us. You were telling me earlier, weren't you? That
They're written by somebody called Marcella Dimitrova, who's a Bulgarian Orthodox, and she wrote most of them for an exhibition in St Pancras Old Church in about 2010, I think. So they are very, very recent. And she's got quite a large body of work. If you Google her name, all sorts of icons.
The cheap painting, the modern painting. Oh, that's interesting.
And she very much uses the Byzantine style and is very much of that tradition.
it's a lovely example, isn't it, of how, I mean, for art historians, apparently, it makes life a nightmare because it's very hard to date an icon, because they do follow the rules. That was one of the things that, as the eastern and western parts of Christianity grew apart, Western art developed along its own way, and you've got more of the sense of, well, the artist can use their imagination more, there can be more of the sort of current styles of painting were taken up. So, you know, if you go to a gallery and you look at Western Christian art, you can sort of guess what century, and, you know, it's fascinating to watch how it develops. In the East, not so much. It's harder to tell. And of course, the other thing is, an icon writer will never sign their name. Say will never. According to the rules, will not sign their name. So again, the idea is not. An icon is always painted in prayer, after prayer and fasting, and as an act of prayer by the person writing the icon, painting the icon. So it's seen not as, you know, this is my work of art, this is God working through me. So they're not signed.
Can I ask, you keep referring to writing an icon?
Yes. Well, some people, it is one way of talking about it. Some people talk about writing an icon and reading an icon, which has a lot to say in it, because they do have, I mean, they're not on a par with Scripture, they're not on a level with Scripture, but they do have that teaching nature and function. Although not all do. I mean, icon painters will talk of painting, so I use both. But it's just an interesting is to remember that some people do talk about writing an icon and reading. It just says something about what they're for that's different from just a picture that's there to decorate.
Just wanted to, I was Father Bruce's pastoral assistant at St Pancras Old Church when that icon exhibition was on. And I remember they were around in church for a week, so we said morning and evening prayer and mass every day with those icons around. And I remember when they left the church, I felt kind of bereft.
Yeah.
Like all these kind of friends have gone. Because they were icons also of the saints and of
yes.
And their effect was so powerful in that way.
Yes. Yes. Yes, that's lovely. I remember when I worked in a parish going to visit an elderly Greek lady who'd been bereaved, and she let me into a tiny little flat and said, "Come and meet my friends." And I thought, oh. And the walls were covered in icons. And it was just so natural for her. And it was like introducing, she was saying, well, of course, this is St Anthony. She said, well, you'll know him, he's your patron. And that's, you know, that's Our Lady and that's St Paul. But it was real, you know, it wasn't a sort of affectation. It was how she saw it, and she shared her home with them. But I think that's lovely to see these friends. And people will have, Orthodox will have an icon corner at home, and you will be, often a child is given an icon on their baptism, perhaps of their patron saint, and when a couple get married they'll often be given an icon, so you will have, plus, you know, your favourite saints or whoever, you will have this little corner where you can meet with your friends and pray with your friends.